On this episode of the Project Managing for the Masses podcast, I have Nick Milo as my guest. I'm going to discuss the importance of note-taking and note-making in knowledge management. And yes, there is a difference. We're going to talk about the differences between passive note-taking and active note-making, emphasizing the value of engaging with this information that you take down and making personal connections so you can link your thinking. Let's get started.
Project managers, have you ever felt like you should get that promotion or a better job? Start a business, write that book. Have you ever felt you were made for more but didn't know where to start?
Welcome to the PM for the Masses podcast with your host, Cesar Abade.
Learn from the experts, think outside the box, have a voice, network, and be extraordinary.
PM for the Masses podcast.
Hello, Nick. How are you?
Good. How are you, Cesar?
Good. It's so cool to talk to you because, I'll tell you how I came across you and the work that you're doing. I started tinkering with Obsidian. I'm sure you've heard this story before. Mm-hmm. And in Obsidian, for those listening right now, and I'm sure this is going to come up during our conversation, is a text-based note-taking app that's we'll talk about that, but it's a very flexible approach to that. And I work with WordPress, in my professional life, which is open source. I'm a big fan of flexibility like that. And but as they say, with great power comes great responsibility. So a lot of the power of these tools require you to do some work in the background to make it work for you. So in Googling how to use Obsidian effectively, I found your YouTube channel and just impressed with your approach to this topic of note-taking. And also the quality of the production of your videos and your content is just really impressive. So I've been a subscriber to your channel for a while now, and I thought I'd bring you and the topic of note-taking and linking your thinking to the audience. So thank you so much.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. And I think it'll be a pretty fun conversation, tethering note-taking, note-making with, the realm of project management. So yeah, I look forward to it.
All right. Yeah. Maybe we can, that wasn't my plan, but maybe we can start there. What's the difference between note-taking and note-making?
Yeah, totally. Well, some of us are likely already doing note-making, so it won't be this great revelation, excuse me. But then for many of us, it might be. And so essentially it's this. Note-taking is the stuff that you did in school. Somebody's talking and you're taking notes. You're writing down what they're saying. Or if you're reading a book or an article, you're making highlights or somehow basically marking or copying what is presented in front of you. So if we had to classify it, we would say, hey, that's relatively passive. Hey, it might feel really, really, really active and engaged, but on the whole scheme of things, it's relatively passive. And part two then is the note making. And that is where we're actively engaging with what's being said. And that's a difference from just copying it or kind of, cliff notes, highlights or something. What we want to do when we go into note making is say, what does it mean to us? Oh, that's interesting. That reminds me of all these prompts that we might just say when we're talking to somebody on a couch or like on a podcast right now. So it's this much more natural, fun, and engaged way of learning by just bringing yourself to the material. When you do, you make more sense of it. So some people naturally do this. If you want to think about the rawest way of note making, it's literally just journaling, because you're not copying something else. You're just journaling your own thoughts. So now we're just taking this active, engaged approach to whatever we encounter. So if it is an article, we say those prompts. We say, that reminds me of blank, and then we answer why. Or, the best one is, catch when you say, that's interesting. We say this all the time in different ways. We might just go, but when you say that's interesting, then you kind of should answer why. And once you do, the floodgates open and we have a lot more fun and we create a lot more value. And that improves our learning ability, our ability to recall information, as opposed to that more passive and rote way of solely note taking. It's a bit of a long response, but hopefully that sets the scene for the difference. Most of us are doing both, but likely we need to be doing less of the taking and more of the making.
And as as we speak of making, you know that my job here involves a lot of creative work. So brainstorming topics, researching, and delivering engaging content for the audience and for you listener every week. So sometimes it can get a bit tough to sustain the same level of productivity and focus. So my coffee consumption was going through the roof and still it wasn't cutting it. So that's when I stumbled upon Magic Mind, which is sponsoring today's episode. This little powerhouse shot has been truly, it's been really a lifesaver, really. It's not just about the energy. It's about the holistic change that I've experienced in my daily life. The best part of Magic Mind is how seamlessly it can fit into my morning routine. So it's a tasty, portable shot that I can carry with me everywhere. And if you're just starting right now, you might not think it's tasty, but now I really enjoy it, and it kind of grew on me. I think the flavor is really delicious, and the benefits are just amazing. So the productivity boost was noticeable after just a few days of trying Magic Mind. It doesn't just give you an energy boost, really. It just enhances your attention span and cognition, thanks to the potent nootropics that are inside. And for those of you who worry about late night caffeine jitters, this little shot of magic lets you sleep soundly, as it's not heavy on caffeine. Now, I know that I'm now in my 40s and these things really make a difference. So the standout ingredient in Magic Mind for me is definitely ashwagandha. This is an adaptogen that reduces stress and anxiety. So as someone whose work requires constant mental agility, this has been really beneficial for me. So here's why I'm sharing this secret with you today. I really believe that Magic Mind can help anyone who's struggling to stay focused and productive, or simply wants a healthier energy boost. So that's why I'm thrilled to let you know about an exclusive offer. All right. So if you visit magicmind.com/PMP and use the code PMP, 3 letters, PMP, you can get up to 50% off your first subscription within the next 10 days, or 20% off for a one-time purchase. You can use this code at any time for at least 20%. And if you do a subscription in the next 10 days, you get up to 50% off. So give Magic Mind a shot, no pun intended, and experience the difference yourself. And don't forget to use the code PMP at magicmind.com/PMP to take advantage of this discount. You won't regret it. Now, Nick, I feel like with the there's a lot of information out there about capturing, right? Like, and usually it has to do with tasks you need to do, right? Like project managers will resonate with this, information that you need to act on because of work or because of a project. Mm-hmm. And then you have reference. Oh, I need to save this for later. So it goes, if this was 50 years ago, it would go in a filing cabinet, and your tasks would be on a piece of paper in front of you. And then, there's the actual thinking that you capture, and usually that's journaling. But I find that that's usually talked about as like, it's almost like an artistic kind of thing you do to help you with mindfulness and, help become a better person. And and I can see how that, unless you're in that stage of life that you feel like you need that, I feel like, I don't have time for that. I just need to, make sure that the things I'm writing down actually, quote unquote, useful for a purpose, for the task that's in front of me, or for a reference, right? And then when you do, let's say you are into journaling, you're writing on a notebook that's disconnected from the rest of your life, right? When especially in this day and age when we have everything is digital and connected and linked, if it can feel like I'm writing this into this notebook, and once I close the page, it's gone, right? It doesn't connect to anything else that I do. Mm-hmm. I just watched introduce my kids to Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. Mm-hmm. And the whole movie just, it's all about the diary that's lost. He goes, without that diary, all his notes are there, all his thinking is there. and in the end, it saves his life. His notes give him the gift of life, which is kind of an interesting a metaphor. So I think in my case, I'm taking notes all day long because I'm in meetings and things like that. And I always feel like I'm writing that and because I've been there before, it's like I have this feeling that, okay, I'm never going to come back to these notes. It's never going to come up again, and then you feel silly for writing things down, but then you feel guilty if you don't, right? So how do we get out of that? How do we go back to, or not even go back, to start writing down our thoughts and don't feel like they're going into the void?
Yeah, sure. Well, I think number one is it's important, if you don't have one already, that you create a permission list, like of all the things that you don't have to do, especially when it comes to these invisible things that we call ideas, and oftentimes we try to represent in physical notes or digital notes. So like, here's a permission. You don't have to copy the presentation or the lecture word for word. You don't have to transcribe all of the meeting notes from your team's meeting. And just saying it out loud, I know like it sounds obvious. Oh, of course you don't have to do that. But by just saying it out loud, it's like, oh, there can be this sense of a weight being lifted. It's like, I don't have to capture everything. Wow. So if I don't have to capture anything, then what is worth capturing? And it kind of flips it on its head. So for one, like our default way is we already feel behind because somebody's talking at 120 words per second, and we just can't transcribe all that in a way that makes sense to us. Yes, we can capture the recording, we can capture the audio, but that doesn't mean that we've made any sense of it. So I think what's really important is that we we filter down the amount that we think we have to. And this is having a sense of what's signal and what is noise. There's something I do want to bring up as it pertains to the differences between like pure like knowledge work and project management work. And the key term here is one from Kurosh Dini, which is about clear scale projects and unclear scale projects. And when something is really clear, it's clear what you need to capture the information and how you want to use that. You probably need to capture fewer notes because there's a clear process in mind. I know when I was working in the entertainment industry, it's basically like you're a part of a military unit, and each job has a very clear, this is what you do, this is how you do it, this is when you do it. And, in that capacity, my need to take notes around sense making or, make notes was less important to do the job. However, it was important to become great at the job and then to quickly get promoted in that job ladder. Now, when we get to an unclear project, these are more creative in nature. I like, how do you say, you can say, if you're writing something, write the essay or write the book, but that's just this huge thing that doesn't really help you accomplish it. In actuality, when you write just a little bit, it opens up a new idea. Oh, what if I tied into that? Or what if now I should research this? And these unclear scale projects are where project management breaks down in the creative fields, because we're trying to take something that is by its nature unclear and all over the place, and we're trying to force it into a linear process. So we can get caught up in that a little bit. But at the end of the day, coming back to what do we capture? First, figure out what is signal and what is noise. And if that's not clear, give yourself the permission. You don't have to capture everything. And then at that point, whatever you do capture, let's say you just have at it while you're in the meeting and you scribble down everything. What is important is to come back afterwards, and in whatever method you use, underline only the most important things to take action on. And you can leave the rest wherever it needs to go. I'll give a practical example real fast, Cesar, before I turn it back. Is just, if you're writing analog on paper because you're in person, it just makes sense, or whatever, you just like the feel of it, it's just more natural, great. I do that too, but I don't feel obligated to now digitize all of that. Why? Like, what gets fun is what gets done. And if something is no longer fun in this transcribing process, it is a clear signal that there's probably a reason it's not fun. It's probably not needed for the job to get done or for the creative project to get done. It doesn't matter. So I keep that in mind. Am I transcribing so much it's no longer fun? I always see this online. People are like, I tried to do the Zettelkasten method and I tried to rigorously take all of my 300 plus highlights from a Kindle book and transcribe them into 300 plus atomic notes. And it just isn't fun. The Zettelkasten method doesn't work for me. It's like, who in their right mind would do that? Like, that makes no sense at all. So being able to filter information and leave most of it on the cutting room floor is just the way to go.
Right. Yeah. And I find sometimes the let's say you're in a meeting, right? And you're taking notes, like you said. There's nuance and context in that meeting. There's body language, right? And I feel my brain is just like sparkling with ideas, and I want to document that somehow. And I think a lot of us don't know how to do that. So the default then is to just write down everything, in the hopes that maybe if I go back to this and read it, those things will come back to me. But I don't think they do. It just becomes a wall of text that I feel guilty to delete later, because it took so much work. Good example, I prepared for the PMP, Project Management Professional exam years ago, 10, 12 years ago. And I wrote notes in very methodical way. And I have that notebook in the bookshelf, and it's useless to me now because the exam changed and I'm never going to read that again. I just can't just throw it away. And I feel like there's a lot in my digital world like that as well. It's just like so much. Just going back to, you mentioned books, right? Like you're reading the book. There's some folks taking highlighting the books. I really enjoy you've been tweeting and talking about reading books, and you have a different take. A lot of people have, I want to read X number of books this year. I used to do that, and you don't like that approach. You want to talk about book reading a little bit?
Yeah, totally. I'd love to hop into that. Yeah, I'd say just generally speaking, there is a bit of a trap out there because there are a lot of people, they love showing you their bookcase and how many books that they've read this year. And I'm all for it. I mean, having a conversation with someone who's long since passed away is amazing. So I don't want to short sell the value of reading books. I think we can all agree that it's a way of opening up a new world in an encapsulated amount of time, and to get an unfair amount of wisdom. So books are amazing, but I will say this: finishing a book means nothing, and it's a very harmful goal, because it doesn't matter if you've read 100 or 200 books in the last year. What matters is what the book got you to think. And so when it comes, this is nonfiction we're talking about. Fiction is a whole nother ball game, and that, fiction, let's just enjoy that for what it is. Now, but if we go back to nonfiction, let's reset that understanding a bit. A nonfiction book is really a tool for thought. So it's meant to get you to think. So by just finishing it and then be like, all right, I did that one this week, time for another one next week. Well, then there won't be time to maybe consolidate the learnings, to consider how am I applying what I've learned? What is really standing out to me? Can I actually even articulate what I just read to anybody else? Even myself or the rubber duck on my desk. Can I do any of that right now? Or was it just a good feeling because it was novelty and it was new and I was reading and I was like, oh, that's cool. Oh yeah, that's awesome. So, there's that false trap of treating nonfiction kind of like fiction, where it's enjoyable because you're learning new things. And I get that too. If you want your nonfiction to be fiction, go for it. But for most of us, when we are reading a nonfiction book, we do want to know, well, how is this going to enrich not just the moment, but future me in some way? And so books are not for reading, they're for understanding. They're tools for thought. And so that means that might change how we engage with it, how we think about making notes out of it. But yeah, I'll stop there just to get your thoughts on that.
No, that makes sense. That makes a lot of. I remember a while back, coming across this is something similar. You should always come out of a book with some action item or some learning or something you can tell somebody, like you said. And that means you have to read slower, right? And not only and be very selective of what you read, because you don't have you have that the time is the common denominator for everybody, right? Like you only have so much, so you have to choose what to read. And I find that difficult sometimes, because I have, especially when you're a podcaster, people send you books to read because they want to be a guest on the show, and I have I'm looking at there's at least like 6 or 7 books in front of me that look amazing that I want to read, but knowing that I just can't just read it like fiction, it becomes how I'm gonna make notes of what I read, and I think that takes me back a little bit to the notes, right? So I've been using Obsidian, which is the app I mentioned in the beginning. And at first, I started by just like a personal wiki. I'm going to have a note for this person at work while I write down, their birthday and little things that I learned about them. And then I'll add a link to another person that on the same team, and then I'll have another note for my grandpa, where I write stuff that I remember about him and things like that. But at the same time, I'm writing notes from calls that I'm in, and it goes into the same vault. And then there's this draft for a post I need to write for work. It goes there too. So, and I have a ton of information there. And also from books that I read. I'm going to write a note about this book. And while I started linking them, maybe you can talk about a little bit about that in your answer. But how do we manage? Because it's just not my knowledge management system. There's other things in there that are not necessarily my knowledge. The notes that I took or the draft for the post. So, do we separate those things? What's the best approach here?
Well, I mean, it's really about what someone is trying to do. The problem is that to answer that question means to have lived your entire life. It's kind of like the Carl Sagan. See if I can say this without butchering it. There's this classical music playing in one of his 1980 Cosmos episodes. He's like fine dining somewhere, and someone brings out an apple pie. And I think he like cuts a slice of this apple pie or something. And then he looks at the camera and says, to make an apple pie from scratch, first you must invent the universe. And it's like so ridiculous of a phrase that, that's why it's kind of become iconic. But to actually know what to capture and all that, you really have to have an unrealistic clarity in your life. The problem with knowledge is it's all around us in all forms and facets. And we're not just the manager at work. We're not just the person who's on the side writing a couple, think pieces or articles. We're multifaceted, and that's great. The problem becomes then what do we capture? What do we make notes on? What are we sharing? And it can be quite difficult. So I would just think like, maybe have 3 buckets. If we want to use the acronym ACE, one bucket you could say A is for Atlas, and that's where you put all the stuff that's not urgent, but it's all about ideas and knowledge. So it's basically an atlas, not of like physical stuff, but of all of the ideas or pieces and bits of knowledge that you think would be helpful to you, either in your current job or more broadly in your life in different ways. So just at the top, you think Atlas, and that's for the space of ideas. And then what does the C? If you have another spot, that would be calendar. All meeting notes, anything, daily notes, weekly, anything that kind of is just coming in and you need a way to process it. Scratch notes, Post-it notes, whatever it is, group that under calendar. And those are for moments in time. So if we think of this ACE, ACE, you have 3 buckets. One is for the space of ideas, and that's Atlas. Number 2 is calendar, and that's for the moments in time. We're missing one. And it has to do with importance. And that would be the E, and E would be for efforts, or we could call them projects. But efforts is a little bit more of a broad understanding, because not all efforts have like these very clear start dates, end dates, due dates. So efforts gives it a little bit more latitude for things of importance. So if you have one folder, you can put stuff that's all about ideas and knowledge. Another folder where you capture all that stuff quickly. And then a third folder where you manage things of importance, your efforts and your projects. Ultimately, this will get you 80% of the way. And then, things can break down, you can customize. The world of knowledge management in general is just too complex for straight cookie cutter solutions. But if you start thinking of the stuff of information, of ideas, of knowledge through 3 lenses, is this the space of ideas? Is this a moment in time? Or is this something important to be done? I think that can give a sense of clarity on how you can organize that stuff in those buckets. And because it's also telling you what's needed there. And if it's the first one, maybe there's no action that's needed. It's the joy of learning, or maybe it's long-term storage. Who knows? If it's in the calendar, maybe it's momentarily important to capture, but you don't know. And with links, that's where we can start linking between these buckets and doing like a lot of sense making. That's kind of hard to just say out loud.
Yeah. Okay, that's really helpful. Yeah, it's categorizing, I guess, of what I'm writing down. I toyed with the idea. I love the idea of having, let's say, a note for a project, right? Because we have all these project management tools. I'm using one right now to manage my podcast, and they're great for Kanban style things or checklists, links to other things. But typically like a project charter, which is like, why are we doing this? What's the goal of this project? Usually that sits out in a doc somewhere, right? And depending on who you're working with, if you're working alone, if you're working in a team, it's going to be all over the place because different teams will use different tools. But I love to be able to link, to have my own project charter, like my own thoughts around this project, and maybe private, right? That remind me why this is important, and have deadlines and milestones and links to these other project management tools where I have the tasks. And it's been. But then, I'll create a note for that, and I look at my bucket, and it's right next to my grandpa note. It's like, It doesn't make a lot of sense. And I think in my brain, just kind of, I feel like I don't know what I'm doing here. I'm just like making it up as I go. But I like your idea of separating those into categories of what it is that we're writing down, right? And in a tool like Obsidian makes it really easy because you can just have different folders, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So maybe we can talk about technology a little bit. You said you use pen and paper as well. Sometimes I feel like I'm relying too much on the electronic version, right? And the problem with that is like if I don't have it in front of me, then I feel like I'm losing an opportunity to write something down, right? I don't want to pull out my phone in the middle of a dinner party, right? So what is the role that technology play in knowledge management, and how can we leverage this without becoming dependent on it?
Yeah, well, the dependency, I mean, we already are dependent on technology for knowledge management. I guess it's just to what degree, and it's what degree do we feel comfortable becoming further dependent on it? But I see the role with technology is much needed. I mean, we could get really philosophical on what technology is, and because forks and spoons are a form of technology.
Right.
They don't feel that way now, but they were. Um, so yeah, I mean, I think overall, it's. I think what the good news is with a tool like Obsidian, which is my Ideaverse, which is where all my thoughts go to get connected. You don't need too many tools that are going to cover that. Personally, where it gets a little tricky is when you are starting to work with a team. And so then what is the team's knowledge base? Is the team remote? Are they working together? There's a lot of remote work, and that's certainly a trend. Not all corporations are embracing that trend. Some are actually moving back towards the office now. But by and large, there's more and more of a need for remote work, which increases our need and dependency on technology. So for myself, we have Obsidian that I'll use individually. We do some things in shared Obsidian vaults, but I really think that's got another about a year, maybe two, to kind of bake in a feature set until I'd be comfortable recommending that for most people. So to complement that, we've used kind of a mixture between Notion as a team knowledge base, ClickUp for project management, and I'm dipping my toes into Tana, which is an outliner that can allow, the same linked based way of thinking, making connections between notes and ideas. But yeah, by and large, I'm spending 80% of my time in Obsidian, and then just the rest sprinkled in through ways to communicate with the team. Along with that, as a form of chat, it's like figuring out what is that chat solution, especially with remote work. So, believe it or not, it's kind of funny, but I found Google Chat to be quite good. It's free and it keeps the chat history. I recognize that there's some privacy issues with Google that people might want to think twice about, but it's just so ubiquitous that the lack of pain and the lack of and the fact that it's maintains the history is really important for me. Whereas a tool like Slack right now, they have a free mode, but you hit a limit and then they start deleting all the old messages. And as someone who's into knowledge management and being able to search search is used 50% of the time by me. It's like usually I might know where to go automatically, but if I don't, I might just remember one keyword. I'll give a good example of a keyword I'll remember 3 years from this week, and that would be Cornell notes. So I'm spending some time on Cornell notes, how you can do that digitally now in a tool like Obsidian. This is a famous and popular way to take notes, usually for college students, but it goes beyond that. And I know, like, if I can't remember exactly what my note was called, I can search Cornell notes, and I'm going to be able to find it in seconds. That's a very clear keyword. And there are so many. I mean, we think, oh, we're going to run out of keywords after we have a few thousand notes. Actually, no. I mean, think about what Google is. Google is just a keyword searcher. And so we're just applying that. And if Google can work for the entire web of information, if these search indexers can index the web, then surely we can search and find what we need in our personal systems of knowledge management, or even in our team systems of knowledge management. So just to kind of round it all together, I think at the core, I don't have a calendar at the core. I don't have a to-do list or project manager at the core. For me, my core is from knowledge management, and then I build out towards communication with the team on what we need to do. And we can accomplish that through different means: the fast chat, the project management, or the team knowledge base.
Love that. Love that approach. That's one thing I really believe in, is like developing your own system, and then finding tools to help you automate or make that system work better, as opposed to finding the tool and then creating a system around it. I think Notion is a good example of, it's so flexible, right? That I'm just going to use this for everything, which is fine until they change their business model or like Evernote. I have like 7,000 Evernote notes, and I never use it anymore because just they changed and but it's all there, and to get it out of there, it's not super easy. And which brings me back to Obsidian. Maybe we can talk a little bit about Obsidian and why is that your tool of choice and what makes it future proof, for example.
Yeah. So, this is where if you're coming at Obsidian for the first time and you're like, why are all of these nerds so excited about Obsidian? You're like, what's the big idea here? Essentially, it's that we've been burned. We've been burned in the past and it hurt. It really freaking hurt, and we're sick of it, and we don't want it to happen again. What am I talking about? I'm talking about that notebook, that physical notebook that I left on a plane back in 2012, and I'm pissed because I lost some of my, best thoughts and journals and all this stuff. I'm talking about Evernote in 2013 when it lost a recording that meant so much to me. I was trying to use its audio recording feature, and I felt horrible about that. Or just Evernote in general, how I filled it up with all these noisy articles because I didn't know any better. And I didn't know I was drowning out my own thoughts. Like, yeah, I could search, but when you get all these false negatives, false positives in the search field, you do start to feel like these are all noisy distractions taking me away from the thing I now have to scroll down to find. So, yeah, I think what people have realized is the need to take some of the power back. What does that mean, take the power back? Well, think about that phrase that we all know and love. Knowledge is power. Well, what does that mean? Knowledge is power. Well, if you can apply knowledge, it's a powerful thing. It's everything, really. But how do we do that? How can we make sure we do that? We have to be able to own our thoughts. And when we have applications or tools that are not completely under our control, it's a harrowing feeling because it can be taken away from us or it could be used against us without us even knowing. And great example of that is Evernote got a lot of flack. I forget the year now. They rolled out, I think the feature is called Context, where it was able to scan your notes and then suggest other articles on the web for you to read.
Gosh.
And they thought this was a great idea. And people love this. People hated it because it was this invasion of privacy. Not only that, but when they have all this data on you, it just, where are they selling that? And I recognize like, hey, if you have a Gmail account, they're going to have a lot of data on you too. But there's something about when you start journaling and you have like really maybe some more private stuff mixed in with some professional stuff that you start to censor your own thoughts. And it's like, wait a second, I'm on my computer, like I'm on my own. I'm not even online right now, I don't think anyways. And here I am trying to like have a personal thought, but I'm hesitating in typing this out because I don't want that to be harvested and then sold off to all sorts of third parties I'm not aware of. So all these times that we've been burnt in different ways. And if you're just a student and you haven't been burnt, or you don't really have like really complex knowledge management needs, maybe you haven't and you haven't felt it and you don't need to jump into Obsidian. You really don't need to. But once you feel the pain, and I really think if you're listening to this, or if you're just part of the online communities out there, you will have felt the pain. Then it's important to own your information. Long story short, that's what Obsidian does. And it does that through being local, being perfectly encrypted end to end. So not even Obsidian can read your notes. It also puts a little bit more of a onus on you that if you use a password that, hey, you got to remember your password because if you do use that password and you want to sync things up, you might not be able to open it up on that other device if you don't know your password. But, these are pretty basic things. The point is that there's a huge trend to take the power back and to make sure that our data is remaining private and future proof, which I can get to in a moment.
Right. And Yeah, using Obsidian kind of takes me back to the early 90s when I first started using computers. You were disconnected. Everything was text-based and we loved it. It was like, oh, this is amazing, right? And for some reason we just want features and features and features and syncing and changing the fonts and the colors and all, and in that we kind of lost the point, I think, which is like, what does the note say? Is it helpful to you? This resonates a lot, and especially when you talk about owning the knowledge, because there's just this infinite knowledge out there today with the internet, and you can just find it now with these GPTs and all that. You can just you can find out anything you want. But how much do you know? And I can look up the information if I need to. Yes, you can, but when you're trying to solve a problem, the way you solve problems, this is my take, you can disagree, but the way we solve problems, which is what our brains are made to do, right? We solve problems by using the knowledge that we have and the experience that we have. And if everything is externalized to Google or to databases, then we lost that human superpower. Right. And I think this is a way to, sure, I can go and look up an article on Carl Sagan, and have his biography in a millisecond. But what does that mean to me? What does his story mean to me? How do I relate to that? Good example, right? Like one of my favorite books is called The Information by James Gleick. And it's about information theory. And it's a delightful book for somebody like me because it's very philosophical, but also very geeky and nerdy about information, bits and bytes and things like that. And he does not talk about that at all in the book, but I also have a religious background, right? My upbringing, and I was able to make connections between what he was saying in the book and my upbringing, right? That, and I just went to Obsidian and wrote those down. This is going to be an article someday, or maybe even a book. I don't know, but this is a cool parallel that I think I'm the only one who had made it, and now it's there. And I think we used to do that more before we had information so readily available, and we lost that ability. I'm going through my grandfather's stuff here. He died in 92. So, but he was a poet and a playwright. He had all these things. I'm going through the letters that he wrote. Like, we don't do this anymore. We don't write down our thoughts and our feelings like that anymore. And I think this is a way to, if like you said, we are free from, the fear of having this information being sold or read by third parties, then we kind of claim a little bit of that back into our lives. And I think it just enriches everything you do and see. If you can make those connections and document them.
Yes, it truly does. And this ties back to when we're talking about like reading a book. The key term here is context. And the better that we can build context, the easier and more fun everything becomes. I mean, we are pattern matching machines or organisms, whatever you prefer there. And let's maybe optimize for how we can build context, because that allows us to put something in the circumstances. Maybe if you're looking at letters from your grandpa that you stumble across, you're able to just contextualize, where was he at that time, what was going on, and have a fuller understanding. And hey, when it comes to reading a nonfiction book, I don't just start reading it. I am wrestling with this book, like physically. That book is, I'm going from the back, I'm looking at the index, I'm going to chapter 5, chapter 6, chapter 7. I'm going to the table of contents again. I'm trying to build rapid context so that when I do start reading a chapter, and it doesn't have to be chapter 1, I'll read whatever I think is most important. Because what's fun gets done. So if I go to chapter 5, and I just did this recently for a book called The Language Game, I've been building all this context already. So by the time I start reading it, every word, every thought has a place to attach to already because of the context. I mean, the opposite of that just blows my mind is like going into something blind and deciding I'm just going to go through it in this linear path. Like, I can't think of a worse way to learn. Hey, if you're watching a movie, do it. If you're reading a fiction book, please, like, that's the way to, of course you go through that linear narrative journey. But if you're like trying to understand something, I think bouncing around gives you basically a three-dimensional look at the material and will give you so many points that you can connect your own experiences to or just other ideas to in such a more rich way. And again, it makes the learning more fun. It is actually more efficient use of time, and it's more beneficial for recall actually, because we have more data points to recall that information.
Yes, especially if you have written a nonfiction book like I have, and you know the process that goes into that. Mm-hmm. You know, you don't need to go from chapter 1 to 2 to 3, and you can skip some chapters altogether. Very, very cool. Now, we're almost out of time, but I want to ask you about the workshop. Well, first of all, linking your thinking, your website and YouTube channel and all the content you have, and the workshop that you offer. And tell us about that. Who's that for? What's the process? So we can add a link to it in the show notes for today.
I would say just go to linkingyourthinking.com, and that's where you can learn the most. If you also go to YouTube and type Obsidian, start here, that would let you learn a little bit more about that tool Obsidian if you have interest there.
Okay. And is there information about the workshop there? You want to talk about that here? Or just is it better if people just go there and take a look?
Well, sure. I mean, linkingyourthinking.com, it's basically a landing page for the workshop, but just the short end of it all is if you felt the pain and you're wondering, how should I organize my knowledge? Well, let me tell you this, there's not one way to do it. Okay. So if we get across the fact that what worked for this person is not going to work for you, then the question is what's going to work for you? And that's where the workshop comes in. We build your custom knowledge system that will last you for life. I mean, that's what we do. And most people use Obsidian, but we have people using all sorts of tools, digital tools to help with that. The big priority is that they link, that you can link notes or files to other links, notes and files. But that's the thing is, you are you. It's truer than true. There's no one alive that's youer than you. A little Dr. Seuss there. And what we do in the workshop is create that custom knowledge solution for you. And it's with you, not for 3 months or 3 years, but closer to 3 decades or, the rest of your life. However you're along, you can stop worrying about, am I doing this right? Am I doing this wrong? Instead, you can learn with the rest of us live and create a system that will actually continue to compound in value for you every day, every week, every month and year.
Awesome. Now, before you go, let's say somebody listening right now, this is resonating with them. They feel like they could do better there. When it comes to managing knowledge management and note making, what is something that folks can do right now as soon as this episode is done to kind of start on that journey of having a knowledge management system and linking their thinking?
I would say number one is to just notice when you say, that's interesting. And instead of continuing to drink from the fire hose of interesting material, put the hose down and say, because, and then answer whatever comes out next. And this doesn't involve any crazy technological system. It just involves you making it a habit to go from a consumer to a creator. And it all starts by being able to say, because. So just walk around in your world today and notice when you say, that's interesting. and immediately go, oh, because whatever comes out of your mouth next, it doesn't matter what it is. It matters that you say because, and then you're going to ingrain this habit of being a note maker, not a note taker, being a creator, not just a consumer. And it all starts there. So if you get that habit going, that is going to be that keystone habit. And then downstream of that, all the other stuff about how to create your system, those will be new problems that you start to feel. But you don't need to start there if you haven't made it a habit to start just working with knowledge in the first place. So I just say it starts with because.
Awesome. That's super helpful. Nick, thank you so much for making the time to be here with us today and sharing some of your well-managed knowledge with us. I recommend everybody to go to linkingyourthinking.com and also checking out even if you're not interested in Obsidian, the YouTube channel is just so well done. I'm going to have links to both in the show notes for today's episode at pmforthemasses.com. Nick, again, thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Cesar. It's been a pleasure to be on here. I just really appreciate it, and I really look forward to listening to it live.
Thank you for listening to the PM for the Masses podcast.
Tune in next week for more great ideas on how to manage your projects better and truly stand out in your industry.
pmforthemasses.com